Okay, let's dive in. Normally, when we sit down to unpack a set of sources, we're looking at, market trends or technical documents, maybe some dense historical treatises.
It's very structured, very analytical stuff.
Exactly. But today, the source material you've brought to the table, this discourse, it is completely different. It's not an academic paper. It's not a financial report. It feels like a raw, intensely personal reflection on the one thing that is an absolute certainty for every single one of us.
Yeah.
Death.
It's an extraordinary piece of work. It really is, because it takes theology, spiritual practice, and just the sheer immediate pain of loss and weaves them all together.
Right.
We're not dealing with abstract ideas in a seminar room. We're hearing from someone who is, quite literally knee-deep in grief. And the weight of that experience makes his analysis of the physical pain, the vanity of the world, and the urgent need to prepare incredibly real, incredibly vivid.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and navigate that discourse. We'll start with the sharp emotional pain of his recent consecutive losses, then move to the very detailed, almost anatomical description of the dying process, and then finally land on the practical, spiritual steps for preparation.
And the context, as you said, is just so critical here. The speaker is delivering this talk in the middle of a perfect storm of sorrow. This isn't some detached lecturer. He actually confesses to his audience that he's struggling. He's struggling intensely just to hold it together and conduct the meeting at all.
Let's talk about that sequence of events, because it's staggering. Just days before this talk, he lost his mother on a Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost immediately after that huge blow, his elder sister passed away.
And this was all on the heels of losing his father and a close friend not long before.
So that's 4 major calamities, 4 musiva, as he calls them, in a really short, concentrated period of time. He even admits to his audience that the gravity of it all, the sheer volume of grief, felt like too much to bear while trying to be their teacher.
He used a really powerful, very old Arabic metaphor to describe how he was feeling. He said he felt caught between 2 millstones.
Shikay al-Rahay.
That's the one. And that image, it perfectly captures the crushing pressure, doesn't it? The constant grinding, the weight of his public duty is just colliding head on with this overwhelming private devastation. He just felt he couldn't do his job.
And what I found so striking was his fear of hypocrisy. That really stood out to me.
It was such an honest confession. He was worried that if he tried to give a normal lesson, maybe crack a joke or be casual, it would be completely false given the sorrow that was just crushing him.
He couldn't just laugh casually, as he put it.
Exactly. The emotional load was just too heavy. So he's in this struggle, trying to reconcile his public role with his private reality. But he pushes through, and he frames the whole discussion not as just another lesson, but as this painful necessity, something driven by the raw reality of mortality that was all around him.
Which sets the stage perfectly for this core conflict. How do you hold on to that crushing personal pain while also maintaining the theological acceptance that your faith demands?
Precisely. And he pivots immediately from his own emotional state to what he calls the sequence of calamity, the musiba. Despite the speed and the number of these losses, he asserts complete satisfaction and acceptance of God's decree.
Which is not just some philosophical platitude.
Not at all. It's a declaration of a very deeply rooted faith. He says without any hesitation that he believes the deceased are now in a better state than they were just an hour before, better physically, free from illness, and better in their ultimate spiritual destination.
It's that conviction that God's will is ultimately for the good, even if the path there is just agonizing for the ones left behind.
Right.
But, and this is the key point, that theological acceptance doesn't just make the human pain disappear. And this is where the source gets really nuanced about the difference between submission and the feeling of alam al-faraq.
The sharpness of separation. Yeah, he emphasizes that grief isn't a weakness of faith. It's a sharp, intense, fundamentally human emotion. And crucially, he argues it's an emotion that's actually endorsed by prophetic example, which is a powerful validation for anyone who's going through that kind of sorrow.
He uses that incredibly moving story of the Prophet Muhammad after the death of his infant son, Ibrahim. It's a moment where you see the raw humanity of the Prophet on full display.
Absolutely. When the Prophet wept openly for his son, one of his companions was a bit taken aback. He seemed to view the tears as maybe a lapse in patience, a failure of submission.
And the Prophet's response is just so clarifying.
It is. He says, "The eye weeps and the heart grieves, but we do not say accept what pleases our Lord. We are indeed grieving for your separation, O Ibrahim."
That one line just separates everything so cleanly, doesn't it? It distinguishes the natural, involuntary emotional reaction, the weeping eye, the grieving heart, from any kind of rejection of God's will.
It validates the speaker's own grief. It basically gives everyone permission to feel that pain without feeling guilty, without feeling like their faith is lacking.
And yet the source then gives us this fascinating contrast. It shows the incredible internal struggle it takes to hold both of those things at once, the human pain and the divine submission.
Yes, he brings up the prophet's reaction when he first got the news that his grandson was on the verge of death.
Right. His first instinct wasn't to rush over, which is what you'd expect from a loving grandfather. Instead, he sends a message back, a message of acceptance.
He does. He sends the messenger back with the words, "To God belongs what he took and what he gave, and everything has an appointed time with him. So let her be patient and anticipate the reward." It shows this initial, almost stoic effort to cling to submission in the face of this terrible news. It was only after the family insisted that he finally went.
So you see the two sides of it. There's the initial command to the self for patience and acceptance, and then there's the reality of grief from the story of Ibrahim that eventually breaks through.
It illustrates a really key point in sort of spiritual psychology. The righteous person strives for that absolute faith and divine wisdom. But the undeniable human pain of separation alam al-firaki is still a valid, real part of the experience. It's a very sophisticated take on grief. And it perfectly sets us up for the most intense and frankly chilling part of the discourse, confronting the physical transition itself.
Okay, let's go there. The transition. Yeah. The sheer terror of the physical end, which the source calls kanakat al-maut, the choking, the constriction of death. We've established the emotional pain. What about the raw physical reality of that moment?
This is where the discourse shifts completely. It moves from introspection to this vivid, almost clinical description. He introduces death as a supreme matter, an amar jalal, something of magnificence and awe, but also terror.
And he makes the point that we just don't talk about it enough.
Far too infrequently. He says, this is the single most important event of our lives, our permanent relocation, and yet we barely contemplate its deep meaning. We tend to push it away or just intellectualize it.
We'll spend hours talking about our careers or our finances, but the one absolute certainty, we barely give it a thought.
Precisely. And to show its universal weight, he brings up the story of the prophet standing up for the funeral procession of a Jew that was passing by.
And his companions were confused.
They were. They asked why he would stand for a non-Muslim. And his reply was so simple and profound, he just asked, is it not a soul? It establishes that the removal of a soul from a body is this fundamental, shared, momentous event for every single human being, period.
And then from that universal principle, he brings it right down to his own experience, his own firsthand account of witnessing the agony of death, Sakarat al-Maut, when he went into the hospital room.
He felt he had to. He bypassed the official visiting hours because he felt this compulsion to see the truth for himself, to internalize the lesson. And what he gives us is this incredibly detailed, almost anatomical description of what happens, and he roots it directly in the Quranic text. It's like a theological map of pain.
So how does it unfold? Where does the soul actually leave from?
The process, as he describes it, begins at the very extremities. It starts at the tips of the toes, and the soul is pulled upwards, almost like you're pulling a shirt off over someone's head. But the point of greatest suffering, the absolute peak of the physical and spiritual constriction, is when the soul reaches the throat and the collarbones.
He uses specific Quranic terms for that, right?
Yes, the taraki, which are the collarbones, and the hulqum, the throat. That's the bottleneck.
But if it's being pulled from the feet up, why is the throat the worst part?
He quotes the Quran, nay, when the soul reaches the collarbones and it is said, who is a healer? That moment, that location is the climax of pain because it's the final exit point. The entire essence of the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, everything you are, is crammed into that narrow passage before its final departure. It is the moment of ultimate suffocation, the final struggle.
And the physical symptoms he saw firsthand are just horrifying. It's like being strangled, but from the inside.
He described the face as being congested, choked, darkening from the struggle. He said the eyes were bulging, and there was this involuntary flow of tears, saliva, mucus. He says it's exactly like watching someone being violently choked, their neck wrenched up in this final, desperate fight.
And he said that seeing it was more powerful than any description he'd ever read or given.
He said the reality he witnessed was more eloquent than any utterance. It goes beyond language. You can read about it, but seeing it is something else entirely.
That intensity brings us to this really striking idea of the soundless scream. The notion that the pain is so all-consuming, so constricting, that the person can't even make a sound.
It's a devastating insight. He cites the commentator Al-Zallaqa on this point, and it's incredibly powerful. Al-Zallaqa suggests that if the dying person were to gather every last ounce of their strength, every bit of energy they had left, and try to scream, nothing would come out. Absolutely no sound would be heard.
And that silence isn't from weakness or giving up.
No, it's because the soul is so completely packed into the throat, that bottleneck we were talking about, that the physical mechanics you need to make a sound are completely blocked. The extraction process itself silences them. It's a mechanism of total helplessness, and it just underscores the profound isolation of that last moment. You can't even communicate how much you're suffering.
It's the ultimate lonely moment. And the source brings this silent physical struggle back into the world of human expression through the poetry of Aisha, the Prophet's wife.
Right. Aisha was there watching her own father, Abu Bakr, go through this. And she translated what she saw, this physical constriction, into this powerful, incredibly concise verse.
What did she write?
She said, "By your life, wealth is useless to the young man when the soul gasps and the chest constricts." That image, the soul gasping, the chest constricting, it just perfectly captures the utter loss of breath, of control, and most importantly, the complete irrelevance of all your worldly possessions in that moment.
Yeah.
What good is all your wealth when you can't even take a breath?
To really hammer home just how severe this is, there's that famous, almost shocking statement from Ali ibn Abi Talib, comparing a death in bed to being in a battle.
It's a staggering comparison. Ali said that for a person to die in their bed, going through that agony, the Sukarat al-Maut, is equivalent to receiving 1,000 sword strokes.
1,000. Is that just hyperbole to scare people? Or is there a deeper theological meaning there?
The sense is that it's not just about the literal physical pain. 1,000 sword strokes is the maximum conceivable external trauma. The agony of death is the maximum internal trauma. It's the violence of having your very essence, the thing that makes you you, forcibly ripped from its physical home.
And there's more to it than just the physical wrenching.
There is. There's the trauma of the unseen. The soul, at that moment, might be seeing its past deeds flash before it. It's realizing its final destination. It's undergoing the first stage of judgment before the body is even cold. It's a perfect storm of physical, spiritual, and psychological suffering all hitting at once.
That makes the reality absolutely terrifying. But the speaker then gives us a necessary counterpoint. If this choking, this constriction is universal, what's the difference for a righteous person?
This is key. He notes that while the physical process, the kanakat, happens to every soul, the experience of it can be different. For the righteous, the agony can be eased or, in some cases, even welcomed. Their internal state changes the quality of the external event.
And he gives some powerful examples of this.
He does. He talks about the companion Hudhaifa. When Hudhaifa was on his deathbed facing that constriction, he didn't shrink from it. He shouted, "Choke! By God, I love you!"
You welcomed it?
He welcomed it because for him, that pain signified his deliverance. It was the gateway to meeting his Lord. The trauma was there, but his spiritual reception of it turned it from a moment of fear into a moment of profound longing.
And the other example, Abu Zallaqa al-Kushani, is maybe even more incredible.
It's an amazing story. Abu Zallaqa had prayed for an easy death. He wanted to be called and to be able to reply, "Labak," which means, "Here I am."
And that's what happened.
The account says he actually died while he was standing up and walking. He was literally answering death's call, shouting, "Labek, Labek," and then he collapsed. It's this incredible contrast that shows that while the body's mechanism might be a struggle, the soul's preparation can completely change the experience from a punishment into a promotion.
Okay, so we've covered the emotional pain, the physical horror of the exit. Now we have to talk about what comes immediately after, the finality of the grave, where that separation becomes formal and the ultimate lesson is delivered.
The scene at the graveside is one of the most powerful teaching moments in the whole discourse. The Prophet Muhammad is sitting on the edge of a freshly dug grave for one of his companions. He's not giving a big speech, he's weeping. And he has a small stick, a meksara, and he starts hitting the ground with it, just tapping the dust.
Why the stick? What's the significance of that action, the weeping and the tapping?
It seems to do two things. First, the weeping shows his own intense human sorrow, again, validating that emotion. But second, the tapping on the ground creates this silence. It focuses everyone's attention. It shifts the mood from just the physical act of burial to the act of deep contemplation. And then he delivers a killer line. prepare for this day.
So direct, so immediate.
It's a visceral command given right there at the edge of the abyss, emphasizing that the grave isn't some far-off abstract idea. It's the immediate, non-negotiable reality waiting for every single one of us.
The speaker is very clear that we shouldn't see the grave as just a hole in the ground. He calls that simple-minded thinking.
Right. It's the first stage of your eternal reality. And he uses this really relatable analogy to get across the terror of that isolation. He says, think about when the power goes out at home and you're plunged into darkness. We panic in that temporary darkness. So imagine, he says, the fear of waking up in the grave when your soul is returned to your body and you're in a darkness so total, so dense that you can't even see your own hand in front of your face. It's an absolute suffocating loneliness.
And that darkness is made even more intense by the fact that the reckoning begins instantly.
Instantly. The prophet's instruction after the burial was so stark. Ask forgiveness for your brother, for now he is being questioned. That word, now alonat, carries this shocking weight. The interrogation by the angels isn't something that happens later, it happens immediately, while the mourners are still standing there.
While the body is literally still warm.
Exactly. There's no delay, there's no grace period. Your departure from the world immediately equals the beginning of your judgment.
Speaking of that proximity, the source explains why the deceased person can hear the clatter of the sandals of the people walking away from the grave. That seems almost cruel, to be left alone but still hear your loved ones leaving.
It is the final agonizing punctuation mark on that separation. The deceased hears that sound specifically to understand the finality of it all, to know that the transition is complete. Even though their soul is now in a new reality, there's this residual, painful attachment to the world they just left. Hearing those footsteps fade away is the final confirmation that they are alone and the world is moving on without them.
To really articulate that pain of farewell, the speaker then turns to what many consider the pinnacle of Arabic grief poetry.
The poetry of Mutamam ibn Wayra for his brother Malik. This is some of the most famous ritha, or elegy, in all of Arabic literature. Mutamam's love for his brother was legendary, and so was his grief.
The stories about his grief are extreme.
They are. The accounts say he didn't sleep for an entire year and that he wept so much that tears started flowing from his blind eye. He literally cried himself raw. This is Alam al-Faraq taken to its absolute human limit and then turned into art.
And the verses he wrote just perfectly capture that shocking sense of oblivion that death brings.
He quotes a few lines, but the central one is, "When we separated, it was as if Malik and I, due to our long companionship, had never spent a single night together." Just think about that for a second. A lifetime of brotherhood, maybe 40 years of shared experiences, instantly wiped out. Reduced to a state of non-existence by the physical reality of the grave.
And there's another verse that really drives home the silence, the unbridgeable distance.
Yes. "Whenever I call your name, you do not answer, though you were worthy to respond and hear." It's that utter lack of response. You could stand at the graveside and scream your loved one's name with all the love in the world, and there would just be silence. The connection is severed.
And this grief was so all-consuming for Mutamam that he became known for weeping at every single grave he passed.
Right, and people started to criticize him for it. "Why are you mourning strangers?" And that leads to his famous defense, which is so poignant. He says, "Grief sends forth grief, so leave me, for all of them are the grave of my Malik."
Grief sends forth grief.
Al-Essa yabath al-Essa. And that line is so powerful that the speaker uses it as a bridge to a very practical point about the social customs of mourning.
He connects it to the legal ruling about how long condolences should be offered.
Exactly. The general scholarly opinion is that you shouldn't offer formal condolences after 3 days. And while there are scriptural reasons for that, the speaker points out the profound practical wisdom in it. He said when he himself was going through his 4 recent losses, he felt so overwhelmed that he couldn't take any more sympathy. He finally understood what Mutamam meant.
Because to go back and console someone a week or a month later just reopens the wound. It sends forth new grief.
It's a mercy. The 3-day limit isn't about forgetting the person. It's a social mechanism designed to stop the cycle of mourning, to allow the bereaved person to begin the hard work of healing, instead of having the pain brought back to the surface every time someone new offers condolences.
So we've gone from the emotional to the physical to the final separation, which leads to the ultimate conclusion. Why does all this matter? Because death, as he puts it, is the great exposer of worldly vanity.
He calls it the fadiha, which can be translated as the scandal or the expose. Death is the ultimate expose of this world. It reveals the absolute worthlessness of everything we chase: pleasure, power, wealth, status. It's all shown to be completely empty at the moment of departure.
The source is very direct about the equality of graves.
Beneath the dirt, the rich man who takes nothing with him and the poor man who takes nothing with him are identical. The speaker makes this point so powerfully. He says the real field of competition, the mid-mar sabq, can't be this world, because in this world, both good people and bad people get to enjoy health and wealth and food.
If this life were the real measure, things wouldn't be so mixed up.
Exactly. So the true field of competition has to be the afterlife, the place where all these temporary distinctions are stripped away for good.
And to illustrate this devastating reversal of fortune, he tells the heartbreaking story of Mu'tamid ibn Abad, the Andalusian king. This story just brings the idea of vanity into unforgettable focus.
Mu'tamid was the king of Seville in Al-Andalus, a ruler who lived in unimaginable splendor. I mean, he was famous for, among other things, having his wives walk on carpets of scented musk, just pure decadent luxury. He was a poet, a patron of the arts, living at the absolute peak of worldly glory.
But that glory just completely collapsed.
Swiftly and totally. He made some bad political moves, and he was defeated, stripped of everything, and thrown into prison in a desolate little village called Agmat. Utterly powerless.
And the most tragic part of the story is when his daughters came to visit him in prison on the day of Eid.
It's the perfect encapsulation of his fall. These were princesses, used to the finest silks and jewels, and they show up to visit their father on what should be the happiest day of the year, and they're wearing rags, the clothes of the destitute. To survive, they'd been forced to take up manual labor, sewing caps to sell in the market.
From walking on musk to sewing rags, it shows how fast worldly glory can just turn to dust.
And this inspired some of his most famous poetry. His verses just capture that essence of the fadiha, the scandal of worldly reversal. He writes, "In the past I was joyful during the Eids, but the Eid has saddened you in imprisoned Agmat." He realizes that the entire calendar of joy has been transformed into a calendar of sorrow for him.
And the lines about losing his power are maybe even more devastating.
He writes, "Time once obeyed your command, but now time makes you commanded and forbidden." He went from being the one who gave the orders to being the one who was told what to do by his jailers. His story is the ultimate proof that status and power are just temporary loans from fate, and they can be called in at any moment.
And the speaker brings this 1,000-year-old story right into his own present devastating experience.
He does. He admits that as he was thinking about his own approaching Eid, right after these 4 deaths, he realized the joy was just gone. The family rituals, going to his parents' house, his sister's house, it was all impossible. The heart of the celebration had been ripped out. And he found himself thinking, just like Mu'tamid, what joy will this Eid hold? He felt the exact same weight as that exiled king.
Before we get to the final section on preparation, he goes back to the nature of fear itself. He calls it the terrifying unknown, the al-janab al-marib. The terror isn't just the pain, it's the mystery of it all.
It's the unseen aspect, the profound silence of the process. He says it's like the part of the horror movie where you haven't seen the monster yet, but you know it's in the room with you. He quotes the Quranic verse, "We are closer to him than you are, but you do not perceive." This is about that invisible internal process of the soul being extracted that happens right in front of everyone, but no one can see it.
He illustrates this with that short, stark story of the Bedouin and his camel. It's so effective because it refuses to explain anything.
A Bedouin is walking with his camel, and suddenly, the animal just drops dead. The Bedouin is in shock, and he starts questioning the body. "What's wrong with you? Your neck is fine. Your head is fine. What happened?" He keeps asking, completely unable to understand this sudden, silent departure of life, until he himself drops dead right next to the camel.
It's terrifying because it shows that death is just this unanswerable event.
It's an incomprehensible mystery, whether you're the one watching or the one it's happening to. The Bedouin couldn't understand what took the life from his camel, and then that same silent, unseen force took him. It shows that death doesn't need a visible cause, no wound, no illness. It's just the arrival of an appointment.
So the final lesson isn't just to be scared, but to use that terror, that exposure of vanity, as the ultimate motivation to get ready.
That is the critical pivot of the whole talk, from pain and dread to definitive action. Preparation, al-istidad. Once you've internalized the certainty and the horror of it, you have to prepare, because that appointment will not be a second late.
And he introduces a specific measure of worth from the prophet, a kind of spiritual thermometer that goes beyond just outward rituals like praying and fasting.
This is a really challenging moment for the listener because it redefines what true spiritual value Qadriyamani actually means. He tells the story of a companion who died, and people were praising him for how much he used to fast and pray, the standard stuff.
But the prophet cuts through that praise.
He does. He asks two very specific, very sharp questions that get to the real heart of the matter.
And what were those two essential questions?
The first was, did your companion frequently remember death? And notice the word choice frequently, not just now and then, but as a constant daily consciousness. And the second question was, did your companion abandon many things he desired? Did he practice self-denial? Did he go against his own base appetites?
And the answer the companions gave was pretty sobering.
It was. They admitted no, their friend didn't frequently remember death, and he didn't really abandon his desires. And the prophet's response is a chilling verdict. Your companion is not what you think him to be. It shows that all the outward rituals in the world, however perfectly you do them, aren't enough if they're not backed up by this internal discipline. The constant awareness of your end and the consistent denial of your lower self. Spiritual worth is directly tied to those two things above all else.
So if I'm getting this right, the reason remembering death and abandoning desires are so powerful is because they're the direct antidote to the fadiha, to that scandal of worldly vanity.
That's it exactly. Remembering death keeps your focus on what's real, on the afterlife, the true midmar sabku. And abandoning desire means that when death does arrive and exposes all worldly pleasures as worthless, you've already been practicing detachment. You're spiritually ready for that transition. The two disciplines work together to insulate your soul.
And this high standard is then shown through two historical examples of what he calls ultimate readiness, al-istidad.
These show what it looks like in practice. The first is the story of the unnamed man at the Battle of Yarmouk. It's about absolute decisiveness. Before this massive battle, he goes up to the commander, Abu Ubaidah, and asks if he has any message he'd like delivered to the Prophet Muhammad in the afterlife.
He just knew. He knew he was going to die that day, and he was ready.
He was completely ready. He had prepared himself to the point where he was just waiting for the moment. He didn't need to make some last-minute repentance or cram in extra good deeds. He then went into the battle and was the first one to be martyred. It's an example of this profound, actionable faith.
The second example, the scholar Hamad ibn Salama, is different. It's not about a single moment of decisiveness, but about a lifetime of optimized routine.
This might be the highest standard of all. It was said of Hamad ibn Salama that if you told him he was going to die today, there was nothing he could add to his daily routine.
Nothing at all.
Think about that. He couldn't improve his schedule. He couldn't squeeze in some last-minute good deeds because every single moment of his day was already packed with righteous acts, Quran, remembrance, prayer, teaching. His whole life was structured as one continuous act of optimal devotion.
That's just remarkable. It means every choice he made from the moment he woke up was filtered through those two questions. Am I remembering death? Am I abandoning desire? There was no wasted space in his life for worldly distractions.
It's the very definition of total readiness. If the man of Yarmouk is the readiness of a warrior, Hamad ibn Salama is the readiness of a scholar. They both got to a state where death wasn't a disruption. It was just the next logical step in a life that was already perfectly aligned.
The discourse ends with a final, practical call to action, bringing us full circle back to the grave, the call to visit graves.
He urges the listener to go to the cemeteries, not to mourn, but to prepare, to call out to the inhabitants, metaphorically, and learn the undeniable lesson they have to teach. And he gives us the poetry of Malik ibn Dinar, who captured this lesson perfectly.
And those final verses really do summarize the entire deep dive, don't they? From vanity to equality to the final conclusion.
Malik ibn Dinar's poem forces you to face the great equalizer. He says, "Where is the respected and the despised? All are equal under the dust." He keeps going, challenging all our worldly ambitions. Where is the proud man with his authority, and where is the one who boasts when he is praised?
The message is just undeniable. But it's the answer he imagines hearing from the graves that really lands the final punch.
The imagined response is stark. They all perished, and so the news perished. O questioner about those who passed, is there no lesson in what you see? The whole point of contemplating death isn't to be morbid. It's to find the lesson that shows you how to live now.
So we've moved from overwhelming grief to the physical and spiritual map of the transition, and finally to the standards of total spiritual readiness. What are the core actionable takeaways here for the listener?
I think it boils down to three things. First, death is a guaranteed calamity, a musibah. But human grief, alam al-faraq, is natural and it's okay as long as it doesn't lead to rejecting faith. Second, the physical agony of death, the qanakat, is universal and terrifying. But faith and preparation can change that experience, turning it from a punishment into a welcome transition.
And the third?
And the third, and this is the most crucial one, true spiritual worth isn't measured by outward rituals alone. It's measured by your constant internal readiness. And that readiness is defined by two things: how often you remember death, and your discipline in abandoning your own desires.
That brings us right back to the end of the original discourse. After sharing all of this incredibly vulnerable and detailed analysis, the speaker didn't end with a big sermon. He just asked his audience to pray 2 quick cycles of prayer and then leave in silence to think about what they'd heard.
It was a very deliberate choice. He wanted to shift them from passive listening to immediate active contemplation. The best response to this kind of knowledge is quiet, solitary reflection, and then action.
Which leaves us with a really important challenge. It connects directly back to that second measure of faith, abandoning desire. We heard about Hamad ibn Salama, who couldn't add a single thing to his day because his life was already optimized. So if the highest act after confronting the raw reality of death is that quiet contemplation and immediate action, what practical desire, however small a distraction, a habit, a luxury you don't need, are you willing to give up today to start preparing for your own inevitable tomorrow?
It's about that one small discipline thing you can deny yourself right now.
That's the challenge. It was a true privilege to unpack this with you.
The insight here is really timeless.